Yetta 14, page 132. Yetta was sick of society women and college girls. They came down to the picket line in their fancy cars, cooing and simpering and wrinkling their noses in distaste if so much as a speck of mud attached itself to their fancy skirts or fancy boots. They moaned, "Oh, you poor thing," as if Yetta and the other strikers were damsels in distress in some movie at the Nickelodeon, as if the strike were being put on just for their entertainment. Rahel and the Society Women's money was keeping the strike going. Rahel said the Society Women's money was keeping the strike going. They've made so many donations. They're paying our bail and court fines. When we're arrested, they're hiring our lawyers. And you heard that Mrs. Belmont put up her house as a guarantee to get the girls out of jail, didn't you? She asked when Yetta complained. Her house is worth $400,000. $400,000. Yetta had stared at her sister in disbelief. So now, because of their money, the judges are sentencing girls to the workhouse rather than just fining them. Yetta argued. Thank you so much. That's so much better. Going to the workhouse. She herself hadn't been sent to the workhouse yet, but she knew that she would the next time she was arrested. She'd been arrested too many times. Anyhow, she told Rahel, their money isn't keeping the strike going. Our spirit is. Our spirit and God. She wondered if Rahel would comment on the fact that Yetta was talking about God again, but Rahel was staring off into the distance once more as if she'd forgotten Yetta, forgotten the strike. There was actually one outside girl who shown up at the strike that Yetta liked, Jane Wellington. Jane came for the first time in early December. She didn't say, "Oh, how awful," or "How do you survive," or "You're so brave." She didn't say much of anything, but when Yetta was telling her about the strike, there had been one moment when it seemed as though she understood, as though a girl who had a fur muff and a gold ring and a hat with 6 ostrich feathers could actually know what it was like to be in Yetta's battered, holy-souled shoes. Then Jane got scared off by a common bum, and Yetta thought that was the last she'd see of her. But lately, Jane had been coming back, mostly on her own, without any simpering, giggly friends. She'd walk alongside the strikers, not saying much. And once, when another girl said, "Thank you for coming," Jane had shrugged and said, "I'm not really doing anything, just watching." And Yetta liked it that Jane knew that she understood that she was for the strikers, not society women who were just bored with trying on dresses and throwing parties and whatever else society women did. Now, Yetta shouldered her sign in the early winter dawn, steeling herself against the cold that stole in through her boots and thin jacket, the tattered hat that had been through more battles than most soldiers. She'd taken the early shift on purpose because it was the hardest and coldest and the worst, and she wanted to spare the other girls if she could. But she couldn't ignore the cold herself, and her stomach was growling because she'd eaten only once the day before, and not at all yet this morning. But she knew Rahel was worried about being able to afford food. Which was worse, to tap into the strikers' emergency relief fund or to use up the money they've been saving to bring the rest of their family to America? Yetta clutched her sign as if it were holding her up, not the other way around. She needed food to be able to think clearly enough to decide how to buy food. Yet another dilemma worthy of Papa's Talmudic thinking. She shook her head fiercely and glared at all the fancy cars in the street. Maybe one of them belonged to Mr. Harris, Mr. Blanc. And maybe she could just go out and talk to them directly. Please, you were once poor immigrants yourself. She did not think that anything she could say would convince such heartless men who would let their workers stand out in the cold for 3 months. "Yetta," someone called, or maybe they didn't. Maybe Yetta was so tired and hungry that she was imagining things now, but she turned her head just in time to see a flash of color, cars slamming on their brakes, a girl collapsing before a shiny bumper. And then the horns were honking. Their ah, ooh, ga sounds were sounding like despairing geese. A man jumped out of the car that had hit the girl, crying out, "Saints preserve us! I didn't even see her!" But the girl was standing up again, looking around dazed. It was Bella, the Italian girl who started out as a finisher with Yetta all those months ago. And the bosses drive their workers to throw themselves in front of the cars, Yetta thought. Bella didn't seem to notice that she'd been hit by a car. She'd just been hit by a car. She kept wading through the traffic, calling out, "Yetta! Yetta!" She wants to join the strike now, Yetta thought. In spite of herself, she imagined how much the society women would love this story, and one girl was so desperate to walk the picket line that she got up from being hit by a car and took up her sign right away. Bella was sobbing, waving a piece of paper over her head. She had never been one to show up at the factory in the latest fashions. In fact, Yetta suspected that Bella still wore the same clothes that she'd worn over from Italy, and no one did that. Even the poorest girl somehow managed to buy a shirtwaist and a skirt and a pair of high-button shoes. But now Bella looked worse than ever. Her hair was tangled and stuck out all over the place, as if she purposely messed it up instead of pulling it back into a pompadour or a knot. She clutched the dirty, tattered blanket around her shoulders, and was that just a nightshirt beneath the blanket? "Per favor," Bella cried out, and a bunch of other foreign words that Yetta didn't understand. Yetta shrugged helplessly, and Bella shook the paper in her face. "What? Say," Bella tried again, this time in passable Yiddish. "These words here, what them?" Yetta glanced at the paper, what she could see of it in Bella's quivering hand. "It's in Italian," a boy said helpfully, suddenly appearing at Bella's elbows. "I only know how to read Yiddish and a little English," Yetta said apologetically. "Maybe Rosario." She looked around, but none of the Italian strikers were picketing that morning. She saw the man from the car that hit Bella, walking toward them alongside Jane Wellington. "Jane knows how to speak Italian. Maybe she can read it to you." The man was apologizing and lamenting. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, you scared me. I thought I killed you. And then when you got back up and walked away, it was like a miracle to the Lord himself." Bella ignored him and thrust the paper at Jane, jabbering away. "She wants you to read that," Yetta translated. Jane looked overwhelmed, but she took the paper. She looked at it, looked up. It says people are dead," she said in a frightened whisper. Bella stood there, looking from Yetta to Jane, uncomprehending. "Tell her in Italian," she commanded. She suddenly felt as though the cold was seeping in through her clothes and finally reached her heart. "I regret to inform you that Angelina Rossetti, Dominique Rossetti, Giovanni Rossetti, Riccardo Rossetti, and Julia Rossetti have lost their lives," Jane read in a choked voice. Bella's face was still uncomprehending. "They're dead," Yetta said in Yiddish. Bella staggered back like one hit by an unbearable blow. "All of them?" she whimpered. "Angelina, Dominique, Giovanni, Riccardo, Julia? Is that all of them?" Bella threw herself to the ground. "La mia famiglia è morta," she wailed. "La mia famiglia è morta." And even Yetta, who knew no Italian, could understand this. "My family is dead. My family is dead." It was an unearthly sound, seeming to soar beyond the 10th floor of the factory, higher even than the skyscrapers. The boy dashed forward and began tugging on Bella's arm, pleading, arguing. Yetta couldn't tell what he wanted, but Bella flung him away, unbelievably strong in her grief. The boy's head slumped into the wall of the triangle building, but he sprang back up and tried again. "Stay away from me!" Bella seemed to be screaming. "I want nothing to do with you." Yetta wondered if the boy had killed Bella's family. Jane peered from Bella to Yetta. "What should we do?" she asked. Yetta held more tightly to her picket sign. She swayed a little, hungry, tired, cold. The sound of Bella's keening seemed to whirl around her. I can walk the picket line for hours on end, she wanted to tell Jane. I can go without food. I can defy the bosses as long as they defy us. Or I can pick this girl up, soothe her in grief, take care of her. Don't you see? I cannot do everything. It didn't matter. Yetta didn't have to say anything because Jane suddenly straightened up. Suddenly decided. I'll take her home with me, she announced, sounding a little stunned as if her conclusion surprised even her. That's what I'll do. Mr. Corrigan, put this girl in the car now. And that's chapter 14.